Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Larissa Bedgood, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at V12. Today, we'll be discussing how to survive in a cookieless world. Before we wrap up the webinar, we'll be taking questions in the last 5 minutes or so, and you can go ahead and enter your questions at any point, and I'll also do a call for questions towards the end. We'll also be recording today's session, so be on the lookout for the recording tomorrow afternoon sometime. And if you'd like a copy of the deck, just feel free to email me when you get that message, and I'll be happy to send that to you. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pass it over to Anders Ekman, President of V12.
Great, Larissa. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Appreciate your spending some time with us today. And I guess this webinar kind of falls under the headline, as if things weren't hard enough, as all of us are grappling with a very uncertain environment and dealing with sort of this massive forced shift to digital marketing, which I know a lot of us have been working on for a long time, but it's all seemingly accelerated. A little while ago in January, before all of this other stuff happened, Google took the lead in announcing that cookies were going away. And cookies, as all of you know, are sort of the internet's historical main way to identify the people that are on websites, sort of the key underpinning of the advertising and publisher ecosystem. So another layer of complexity in our world of digital marketing, just when we needed it. But fortunately, we've got Todd Dziedzic here, who heads our digital business in addition to analytics, and Todd will be able to kind of decipher what's going on and frame up how marketers and publishers and the ecosystem in general are sort of trying to deal with this really pretty profound shift, as the numbers will indicate. Okay, Larissa, let's truck on here and take a look at what follows. So one of Todd's themes is going to be that marketers have probably an obligation at this point to take a lot more control over understanding their customers and their prospects, and that requires, of course, a bunch of assets that marketers may not have at their disposal or may have in kind of an underdeveloped way. So at V12, we've kind of developed a 3-part go-to-market strategy or set of products that really, provide a lot of the underpinning of being able to take that control. Our technology platform, V12 Velocity, links together first-party data management and the ability to prospect and understand the world of third-party prospects out there in the market and conduct customer journeys and analytics against the actions that you put into market against both of those populations. And so that's an important kind of foundational part of what we do. And then our 2 data sets of product families, V12 Data and V12 Signals, provide both the understanding of consumers, both first and third-party consumers, everything about their households. That's sort of housed in the V12 data bucket. And then in the V12 Signals bucket of what we do is a whole host of intent data products. And so if you have the foundation built, you understand who your own customers are and who you need to go prospect, you can then really have a very comprehensive understanding of their activities in the moment, so you can understand what their shopping desires are, what they're up to, and how you might be able to cultivate their interest. So all of this does kind of feed into a marketer's ability to survive as cookies become less the coin of the realm, and marketers have to kind of fend for themselves a little bit. So Larissa, let's move on, and we'll now kind of start diving into both some of the news, and then Todd will kind of share some of the numbers and sort of the profound nature of this change that's going to go on, led by Google. So you've seen the news. In about January, Google said that within 2 years, the cookie is no longer going to be a currency, if you will, within the Chrome browser. That's a big deal. I don't think anybody needs convincing how dominant Google is. And I think that has now set into motion a bunch of actions by marketers to try and figure out what's next. Both the other kind of main portals to the web, the other, kind of browser-based companies, but also big ecosystem players like LiveRamp, marketers, providers of syndicated data like V12, and so on. So all of us are attempting to get our arms around the situation, and there is no definitive solution yet, but there are some themes that Todd will kind of start to share with us now. So having created the problem here, Todd, we hope that you will start to solve this thorny problem for us. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no pressure in 20 minutes, right? No pressure at all.
No pressure.
Thanks, Anders. Right, and just to put it in perspective, that's what the first thing is. Anders alluded to, the big sudden thing was Chrome's announcement, Google's announcement back in January, but it's been building a long time, and that's what we wanted to lay out for you here with sort of these numbers. Safari did the same thing almost just over 3 years ago. They represent about a third of the traffic. Firefox followed suit late last year. I know their numbers don't look so profound, 4% versus a small share of the pie, but it's recognized the way these are tracked that many Firefox users may actually be counted as Safari by some of the traffic people. So if you combine them together, it's over a third, pushing 40% of the traffic with those two browsers, where already publishers have been experiencing lower monetizations, which means they can't quantify who will see this impression to the advertisers, so the advertisers bid less to zero. So that takes money out of the publishing network. And then the big, sort of hammer is Google at over half the traffic in the US. And they announced that they will do the same within 2 years. And what it is, and it's a technical detail, but the cookies, the functionality in specific they're calling out first is this cross-site login, right? And so that's what allows the session, if a user goes to a publisher site, the publisher can look, a third-party cookie can be called to log into, sort of a demand side, and then the supply side and the advertiser can decide, do I want to bid? Do I want this user to see my impression? And if so, how much? So that's the part that's really changing kind of immediately in the next 2 years. And we go to the next side, what we kind of see are sort of what the alternatives look like. And this originally started as 2 alternatives. It's already in just 6 short weeks kind of split into 4 alternatives. But the first one, and this was started by Google, was, hey, let's use browser history only, right? This is what they refer to as the privacy sandbox, as one idea for how this whole thing could work. The big side of what they're endorsing is consumers, right, or users can easily then go into their history and see all of the websites that they visited and know that if they can see it, so can advertisers. So if you don't like that web page that's being shown, you don't like them to see that you've been to ESPN 3 times today, you can go ahead and delete them. And then next time you open up the browser and you go to a first party, go to a publisher, that won't be used. That criteria or that visit won't be used to determine whether or not you should see an impression. So that has some consumer things, but it does push off the offline or you bring your own data kind of off the table, right? Because it's only within that browser stream. Remains to be seen, could you still incorporate some specificity like, hey, I'm marketer A, that's just my branded property. Was this a prospect or was this a customer? Was this a good customer or was this an inactive customer? And those kinds of things, it's not quite the same, but you still have some of the functionality. And the big reason I think this is getting some traction, and particularly the publishers, is we saw those numbers that Safari and Firefox are already dark. So they haven't as yet followed suit that they would offer the same sort of browsing activity alternative. But if they did, that would be very compelling for advertisers because their ability to sell those impressions is greatly reduced. Their monetizations are approaching zero on like 40% of their traffic. If they followed suit with this browser, suddenly they would get 40% of their impressions off of zero. So there's a lot of there's a lot of room to play that could make the publishers whole, if you will, at least at pre-2016 rates. And then the interesting side is kind of these next three all kind of come into the bucket. What if we can do it from a first party stance instead of eliminate the cross-site functionality? That's what's going away. So the third party cookies ability to log into a demand side partner disappears. Can we pivot that and use it as a first party login from the publisher side? And that's where we're seeing a lot of ideas kind of surfacing. You know, the first one is converting to a common ID. There's been a lot of talk on this for years, right? Since the cookie was invented, its flaws have been discussed. It's been causing marketers problems since it was launched, frankly. But we've always been able to negotiate it to a bid level, right? So given the accuracy of a cookie, here's how much this impression is worth to me, because there's some plus or minus on whether or not this visitor is truly in my audience. And the pros there is if you do have a unique consumer ID, that gives you true frequency caps, right? So instead of setting a frequency cap at a cookie, you're setting it at a person. And so that's more meaningful for how you think about it. And then, you know, the other big one is if it's a unique consumer ID, maybe it's not limited just to the internet, right? If you think of addressable TV, if you're going to introduce a unique consumer ID that's, you know, standard across the advertising network, then what really makes this compelling is if we got everyone together to agree on what that ID was, or the family IDs that was, you could then port it over to addressable TV, and now your frequency caps and your impressions and measurability could be across both addressable TV and the internet. So that's got some really good, strong promise. And then the two below it are a little bit, you know, the cons there being who controls that ID, what are the players? Some people are going to lose, some people are going to win. Are you giving too much power to a single company who controls that ID? You know, and so the other alternatives below it is because you get some functionality on a lighter side. And one of them I think is starting to really get scrutiny and squash, but the first idea was, what if we passed simply hashed email or hashed phone number and using that to identify consumers across these kind of data ecosystems? There's a lot of concern about putting something as strong of a personal identifier as that, even in a hashed format, into the bid stream, that's not safe for consumers. So you're getting some pushback from that. I had a note here. The idea came from a small presentation, a keynote address at the IAB, that they may endorse this. They quickly walked it back, but they didn't say absolutely not. They just said that they're evaluating it. So to be determined there, if that's a viable solution. And then the last one is some combination, not quite a cookie or a hashed email, but something like an IP address or something like a network imposed ID, you know. And so, you know, kind of the con there is within the blog post, it specifically calls out fingerprinting techniques as also things that they want to shut down as they find them. So I don't know how viable something like an IP is as an alternative to a cookie, but there could be something there. But the big theme of all three of those last ones is to put the onus on first party data. So that makes the onus on both the publishers as well as us as advertisers to be a little bit stronger about who our customers are and how I can identify who they are so that I can market to them appropriately in the right channels. And that kind of brings us to where those themes of what we can do now to prepare for the cookieless world on the next slide. We see it kind of on three broad buckets. One is find your customer, and we'll talk about that. If we think about the immediate problem is being able to see your website visitors, for example, understanding who come with don't log in, you don't know them now, you're probably communicating to them with a sort of a retargeting cookie, right? So that if they go somewhere else in the browser, you can drive them back to your site. But there's ways to be more precise about that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And building that identity of those anonymous visitors will also help you broaden who you can target in the cookieless world. And that kind of building on that theme, it's more about precision, right? So understanding exactly who these sort of prospects are, splitting them between high value and low value, and having that sort of precision level will help you navigate, you know, more expensive touch points and other channels that are certainly have stronger engagement rates, but the costs are always also higher. So you need to be more precise to navigate those. And the natural extension of that is right down to your customer base. How can you use your customer base to drive the insights to desegment the marketplace into these are super high value customers, these are low value customers, and even beyond that, these are need states that make this customer group valuable for me. And these are other need states that are completely different and would require an alternative message, but they can also be compelling and valuable to consumers. So we unpack those a little bit on the next slide. One concept of this, of finding your customer, is an example of our product that we've launched. It's Signals Web ID, and the thought process of this is it's an improvement on sort of the display retargeting activities today. So as you know, if you're an e-commerce or a retailer, or you use a website to sell your products and services, most of the visitors, not high 90s percentages, you don't recognize. They're not logged in. So it's just an anonymous traffic. Today, there's some simple things relying on cookies, and third-party cookies in particular, where you store that on their device, and the next time they open up the browser, you can shoot them a message and drive them back to your site. What we've done is taken that browsing activity, using our ID graph, we're able to identify who we think that consumer is, right? So not just a guess in descriptive terms, but the full postal address of who this customer is, including email. And so then that allows you to really understand who this visitor was, right? Was this visitor a high value customer, a low value customer, an inactive customer? Is this a prospect? Was this a really good prospect? Or is this a prospect who's got imminent intent to purchase in my category? Or was this a prospect that might just be, higher up the funnel and investigating? And then based on that data, you can then contact that customer on any channel, right? And that includes things like email, acquisition email campaigns, or putting the campaign into their social feed or direct mail and those sorts of things. Now, those are higher touch, deeper impact channels, but by qualifying which of those anonymous visitors you push into those contact points, the RIs will be there to support it. So that's the big way, is to kind of start that process of attaching first-party information to your anonymous visitors. And that rolls into our next slide of just being precise, all right? And this product, you can kind of see it there is third from the left of our Web ID. But if those sort of blanketed programmatic display campaigns from these kind of low CPM but mass scale campaigns become untenable, right? Because you can't qualify the traffic enough even to make those low CPMs work, then the alternative is you have to be smarter and more precise about who you want to acquire, so that you can communicate them with more expensive channels, but with the magnified ROIs that you need to support that. And that's where our signals come in general, right? We have our mobile signals we launched a couple of years ago. Online signals followed suit. Mobile signals, this is the concept where, with permissible purpose, we understand the GPS trails of a smartphone and the consumer who owns that smartphone, where they're shopping, where they're going in the physical world, and we do that with the context. Does this trigger an intent by this consumer to purchase in this category, right? And so once we're able to identify that then becomes a high valued prospect that makes sense to acquire through even those deeper touch channels. The same with signals online. This isn't so much search terms per se, but we look at from a contextual, from the time the browser opened to the time it closed. What do we think the intent of this browsing session was? And specifically for us does this mean this person has imminent intent to purchase in a specific category, right? And then right down to the old life events, which are more curated in the physical world, but does this family just have a baby? Does somebody in this household graduating from high school or college? And those sorts of big life stage events that trigger that consumer is in market for products and services. And so that what really allows that sort of precision, that this consumer fits the profile of my customer base and has imminent intent. That's what will allow you to continue to grow your acquisition even in deeper touch, more expensive activation channels. And then one more plug we wanted to kind of make on the next slide is, in this kind of trying times and dynamic times, that sort of online research is spiking in certain areas, right? And so we just wanted to kind of browse this up, since the last 2-week period, which kind of covers where a good portion of the nation is under stay-at-home orders, we're seeing massive increases in people evaluating home electronic purchases, business loans, mortgages, retail apparel, even shirts. That's an interesting dynamic there, is that with our offices, everyone working from home, and the use of more video conference, where people are actually turning on their videos of buying shirts versus bottoms, right? So the shirts purchase sales are up, pants sales not so much, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. But that kind of a tool to quantify this consumer is a right fit for my goods and services and is expressing an imminent intent, then instead of worrying about a programmatic display impression, you can think about an acquisition email, you can think about a social feed, you can think about direct mail. And that's the way you can be able to continue your growth cycle in a cookieless world. And that extends right onto that third theme about knowing your customer. And we've got a few slides here on the next page, starting with the next page. It kind of talks about the activity that you would handle with your first party data. And we wanted to point this one out because this is an example of a client that we had. They're kind of an e-commerce, but tire seller, right? So they sell tires for vehicles like cars and trucks to consumers, but as an e-commerce play, right? So they had this dynamic of really rich PII data, right, from both a build to and a ship to, but no understanding of what that told them about their customers. And so this is a typical play that we do for e-commerce brands in particular. This first thing is about data hygiene, making sense of it, separating out the B2B customers, your business customers from your consumer customers, the high value from the low value, right? Well, we could do just simply by putting some data hygiene, first party data hygiene rules in place, and using kind of our software. DataFuse is the big one we like to refer to find unique consumers and households within your customer database. We could kind of see where the high value was, the low value was, etc. But that's one level of precision. Just I have commercial customers, I have high frequency consumer customers. The high frequency consumers are actually worth more to me. That's interesting than a business. Why is that? And on the next slide, that's where sort of the research project that we typically do comes into play, where we bring our data assets into play. Things like interests. In this case, we could see motorsports, outdoor activities. So people who, had ATVs, boats, meaning they had trailers, they had one vehicle to tow, one vehicle to drive. Those sorts of helped us formulate some use cases for why people are so concerned about their tires, because that's, if you're towing something, you're far more concerned about the tires on your truck than if you're just, driving to, the grocery store 2 or 3 times a week. And so then that allows you to get very specific. We're looking for the weekend boater, the weekend hunter, and how you talk to that consumer is now very specific to their hobbies and interests. And then you can clearly articulate the advantage to buying your products and services from you, right? And so that specificity creates smaller audiences. But the last side and the last point we wanted to make is that's where you use the latest data science techniques. For us, it's on the next slide, is we've instituted a machine learning discipline to modeling, right? And what this simply means is what used to be an analytic project measured in weeks is now measured in hours. So that when we get all of these specific use cases, I'm trying to acquire customers who look like boaters versus hunters versus handymen and that sort of thing, we can spin those models up very fast, right? So we can go into our national consumer database and find a scaled audience that looks just like those consumers who fit those exact same need states. And now you can do very focused acquisition campaigns at scale, to customers with very specific needs. And that's the point of what machine learning fits into this equation, is because you can get something that's very specific, but in a matter of minutes and hours, have a scaled audience. And so I hope those were the big 3 things, starting with, making your website work harder, right? To know who your customer is and know how to communicate to that customer in a deeper touch channel, all the way through is to leveraging your first-party data to get very specific audiences at scale. And I hope that's helpful to you guys in this kind of trying time. Anders, did I
Todd,
miss,
thank you.
miss it?
No,
Yeah.
that was great. And I guess, yeah, the sort of the headline back to the beginning is we don't really know, right, how all of this is going to go. But Todd's exactly right. I think take more control over who you're talking to and why you're talking to them. Don't be entirely reliant on just the marketplace to provide you with undifferentiated folks to communicate to. It actually really good. It's a good time in the market because common sense is going to prevail, and the truly kinds of targeted marketing you just talked about, Todd, are going to be the things that win the day, as they always do. So thank you. Great job.
Excellent.
And Larissa, I think we've got a few questions. So why don't we have at it here?
Yeah. And if you have not had a chance, you can go ahead and enter your question now. And if we run a few minutes over, we'll be sure to get your questions answered. So the first question is, what's the accuracy rate of Signal's web ID to identify a person visiting a website?
I can take that one. So accuracy rate, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure the accuracy, where the accuracy is focused on. But what we've seen is, in a typical case, over half of the unrecognized, so these are consumers that visited, didn't log in, about half of those visitors we'll be able to identify the mailbox address as well as email on those consumers, right? So about half of them we're able to recognize. Now there is certainly some business rules depending on the activation channel to understand, is that it's true that no device is used by one and only one consumer, right? So which one was actually on your website anonymously, then we use, as part of that slide about, we know more about that. Once we match that consumer to our databases, we can qualify them a little bit better for you, to a level, depending on the activation channel, where we can make that a very good performing campaign for you. I hope that. Anders, do you have any other perspective on the accuracy?
Nope, I think that's right on. I mean, I think the 50% number, Todd, that you quoted, I think is what we've seen. And there certainly is judgment to be applied within there. But yeah, that's a pretty good going in number, and you can tweak it from there.
Great, thank you. Next question is this based on a platform fee or traditional CPM pricing?
Oh, I think that's the web ID, Anders. Yeah. Do you know the packages?
Web ID is not based on CPM at all. It's actually, there's a little bit of a implementation that Todd and his team need to do. So it is a flat fee per month. And I guess the other thing to know about it is, because the data is sensitive, of course, we don't want to be just releasing the data out into the world. So our team actually conducts the in-market follow-up with those folks, and that thus far has proven to be quite successful. Now, of course, once those folks become known to you through other channels, they respond or whatever it is, they're certainly able to be communicated to freely. But I think we're all trying to be as prudent as possible, I guess, in the initial rollout of this thing.
Great, thank you. And we actually have another question on Web ID. So I just wanted to mention to everyone that we did just host a webinar on that yesterday. So if you'd like the recording, just reach out to me and I'd be happy to send you that link. So the next question is, how does your Web ID product compare to some of the other solutions out there?
Oh, I was actually, this is the task that Anders put me on last week.
You're working on that right now, aren't you? Yeah, right.
In fact, I've got Anders' feedback right here. Well, the big difference with it is our ability to email. Right? If you don't know us very well, one of our key differentiators is our ESP business, where we have acquisition emails. That's a huge differentiator in the marketplace. I know that's gone through, it's kind of life cycles, and we remain standing as one of the dominant players there. So that does cross the advantages. You're not just doing display retargeting, right? There's a lot of players doing that, and that's a smaller CPM with some frequency issues, and not just direct mail where you can't, certainly don't want to, just an anonymous website visit does not necessarily justify the cost of a direct mail piece, right? I mean, all of the other players who are doing, including us, would qualify that for some other in-market intent signals to say that here's the portion that you can profitably convert through that high touch channel. Email is really a key separator. And on a little extent, I haven't found it, Anders, to be honest, I haven't found people touting it, but then taking that and loading it into something like a social campaign, like a Facebook campaign, I think that's a natural extension for us, because of that email identifier. But it also appears that we may be one of the few people offering that service as a differentiator.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I'd point out too is that a lot of the services, sort of the early days services like this, started with IP targeting, which is, to a limited degree, fine. Think about, however, when you get into sort of denser settings, you've got an apartment building or something like that, that the entire apartment building could be seen as one IP. So IP targeting has limits to the building or the household. And the nice thing about our solution is that it's ID graph based. So we're targeting people. And that obviously plays into the success of the thing to a pretty fair degree.
Great, thank you. And before we wrap up, I want to get to this one last question. I think it's pretty relevant. Regarding everything that's going on right now, what are a few marketing tactics that you suggest that we engage in, or that I engage in right now?
Yep. I think, again, if you get the recording of the webinar yesterday from Larissa, you'll see some of these themes, and we'd also direct you to shoot me a LinkedIn invitation, and we're publishing a fair amount on our LinkedIn channels and my own. So, we'll sort of be happy to share all that with you. But I think there are some really important themes in the marketplace that we're seeing. One is this, as I said in the beginning, this shift to digital engagement and digital marketing has happened in totality all at once. So you've got 10 or 15 years of digital innovation and work being crammed into a month-long cycle. And if you're not prepared for it, I would suggest some moves to close the gap. In particular, I think, because everybody's shopping digitally now, and there really are still people shopping, there's the opportunity to take advantage of that and identify lower funnel consumers. So Todd showed a graphic of our Signals product line a little bit ago, which is all about identifying lower funnel consumers. Now, Signals Mobile, where we track folks to mobile locations, is maybe a little bit less relevant in the moment, but marketers are using former presence in a location to target people still. But now WebID, people who are on your website and or Signals Online, that really isolates folks who are actively browsing for very, very specific either categories or products and services. Those are the places that we're seeing clients really migrate to. One note on Signals Online, it makes all the sense in the world, but we're seeing these massive movements of browsing activity from certain behaviors to certain other behaviors, and the shift of mobile to online, to the point where, let me give you an example from yesterday, we've seen this huge move into auto aftermarket related products and services in online browsing, which tells us, all right, people still need to figure out how to care for their cars. How are they going to do that? So there's this disintermediation, if you will, of existing behavior and the migration to new behavior. We're seeing that in the online data that we're picking up. Nice thing about what our team has built is you're able to isolate who those people are and to go talk to them in a very specific contextual way. So we're definitely seeing, I'm sorry, it's a long answer, but it's interesting. We're definitely seeing the move to digital and the move down funnel as sort of really key themes that every marketer has got to get right with right away.
That is a great answer, and we will be doing more webinars. We're hosting them now every week to help you kind of refine your marketing strategies, so kind of stay tuned for upcoming email announcements. We're also publishing a monthly or a weekly newsletter on some of the marketing themes that we're seeing out there. So if you're interested in any of those, just reach out to me via the recording when I send that tomorrow, or look up Todd or Anders on LinkedIn, or myself, and link in with us, and you can see some of that content. So with that, I'll let you go. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. We hope to see you on one of our future webinars, and just thank you for joining us today. Take care.